Supervisor Colfax's comments. I appreciate some of what he's said. When we developed these ordinances, and I was on the committee along with, I believe it was Supervisor Wagonette at the time that we developed these, we took that scenario into consideration because that was one of the impetus of trying to put some teeth into this. When we have citizens living in very unsafe, unhealthy conditions, that's wrong. And not having the teeth to go after those landlords, it was wrong. And so what we put together not only is the physical side of the corrections of the code violations, but we also put together a team of social services and of mental health and public health, environmental health, to go out and not just throw somebody out on the street and say, well, geez, you lived in squalor, so we're going to fix that, so now you're on your own, but to work with them and find the housing for those folks. That was a key part of this, and I'm sure now that I mentioned that, he's going to remember it. But that's what we put together, was a whole task force, so those issues are addressed. Now it's more than just bare wiring and get that fixed, or garbage, get that cleaned up. It's finding safe housing for the people that are being displaced. And there's even a penalty, if I remember right, in to assess the landowner, the landlord, if that is needed. So we dealt with that, and I appreciate Supervisor Colfax's concerns, but I think we've been able to address it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of moving things along, because we still have a number of items in our agenda, I wanted to share with you, I have come from a county, in a rural county, that has exactly this kind of situation. I think, if anything, Frank and Jim are understating what you're going to see when you go to have these lien hearings in front of the board. Many of the people that you're going to be dealing with will have mental health issues. Some of them are collectors. There are people that are out there that will show up. They have no other resources. You can attach their property, but then you end up with a social services issue and you end up displacing them. So I think it is something that we should really be careful, and as we used to say in Covey, begin with the end in mind. And there are some unintended consequences that you're going to deal with as you go through. Most every single one I've ever dealt with takes at least a half hour, 45 minutes of the board's time. They come in, they plead their case, they ask for additional time to do cleanups. They don't have the resources. It involves your code enforcement because they hold their hands throughout the whole process. You go out multiple times over and over again. So I think there's some categories here that you're dealing with. You've got the people that have code enforcement violations regarding their houses and how their houses are constructed, some illegal additions you put on. You have the collectors who collect junk on their property, and you have those issues to deal with. And then you have some people that deliberately skirt the letter of the law and how we do the things. So I think you have to be careful when you look at those different groups that you're going to deal with. It seems to me that perhaps we ought to have a dry run through with a couple of these before that we see how things work. We have the Public Resources Committee. If it's referred back to the committee as a standing item, we can perhaps work through a couple of these different issues, and we can try going through the process on a couple of them before we go too far down this road. It's just very, very labor intensive of what you're embarking on here as far as the board and with your schedule of what you're going to be having to deal with. There are housing issues that you're going to create by decisions that you make. Absolutely. There are health issues that you're going to create. Absolutely. So I think we have to have a very focused approach as we go forward with this, how we're going to tackle it. Everything that the various board members have said today, I'm in 100% agreement with you. So I think what we're talking about here is how are we going to start the process, and what adjustments are we going to make as we go through the process. You have some functioning committees. Let's take a few of these cases through the functioning committees with our staff and take a look at how we go about solving the problems before we move forward too aggressively in what we're doing.
Well, I've purposely not made any comment here. In my tenure in the county, it takes me to almost every corner of the county. And because this county has a history of doing it one way and it being incorrect or inappropriate, of not taking any action on this, does not call for us to continue that action. The change has to be made at some point. We're at that point, and as with any ordinance or new law or any resolution, it's a living, breathing document that will change and need to be tweaked as we approach particular items. This is going to have to be one of those. And I'd say the first several cases are going to have to be widely publicized to the nature of health and safety. You know, we cannot turn our back on the health and safety violations that really brought this forward to this situation today. Some of those examples being a travel trailer where 2 children were burned to death because we turned our back and allowed extension cords to be used when there were people knowing of that situation, and it caused a fire and allowed those children to be burned to death. We had a housing situation north of Willits where to get to the rental units, you had to step through the raw flowing sewage to get into the house. We have another situation north of Willits where 11 years ago,